So, a couple things to go back to, I think, just before leaving carousels and roller coasters, to make sure everybody's on board and say my couple public service announcement pieces, sort of. I hope I conveyed a sense that that you feel accelerations, you don't feel velocity. Velocity, you close your eyes, you can't tell how fast you're moving left, right, up, down, whatever, as long as you're moving at a steady speed. But you certainly can feel accelerations. And you feel accelerations because you feel all the parts of your body trying to be inertial, trying to continue moving as they were moving. And if you accelerate, some parts of your body you have to push on other parts of your body and so on, which create stresses inside your body in order to get all of you accelerating off in a particular direction. So you get this feeling that's in the direction opposite the acceleration. It feels exactly like a weight. It's not a weight at all, it's simply your inertia. There's no force pulling you in the direction you feel pulled. It's your inertia trying to make you keep doing what you were doing. What else? The strength of this feeling of acceleration is unlimited. It just depends on how much you're accelerating. If you accelerate too fast to the left, you'll feel pulled to the right so ferociously that it'll be uncomfortable or worse. Questions about the feeling of acceleration? Things to say associated with this. I was talking with someone before class about why is it that when you go, say, around a curve or in a full circle, that if you double the speed at which you do this trip, the acceleration goes up not by a factor of 2, but a factor of 4. And after some floundering around trying to get a good explanation for it, if you think about this is you going around in the circle. In half a turn, you go from velocity this way towards you to velocity away from you. That's a certain change in velocity. And if you do the trip twice as fast at twice the speed, first off, the change in velocity is twice as large. Because you go from, instead of 60 miles an hour toward you and 60 miles an hour away from you, I'm using you too many times here, but bear with me. You go to 120 miles an hour from this way. The change in your velocity from toward you to away from you is twice as big. So there's a factor of 2 in acceleration that has to come about just from that. You've got twice as big a transition in velocity to undergo. So that's a factor of 2. And you do it in half the time because the trip from here to here is reduced by a factor of 2 in time. You're moving faster. Okay? So there are 2 factors of 2. So when you complete a trip like this at twice the speed, there's 4 times the acceleration going on. A factor of 2 because you get there in half the time, and a factor of 2 because the change is twice as big. And that kind of factor of 4, the fact that the acceleration goes as the square of your speed, that comes up in other contexts too. It's kind of common. Actually, one that's worth mentioning. I used to teach how magnetically levitated trains work in the other semester, but there it was. And the issue is that as trains go faster and faster, 2 things start having trouble. First off, the grip between the wheels and the track that's normally used to propel the train forward. Well, as you get more and more air resistance, as you go faster and faster, that grip gets hard. The wheels can't, the locomotive can't grip the track strongly enough to pull itself forward at 500 miles an hour. The wind is too bad, is too big. So that's one problem. But the problem that's relevant here is, suppose there's a little bump in the track. The faster you go, the less time you have to get over the bump. And to go over the bump, you have to accelerate upward a little bit, and move upward, and then worry about coming back down the other side. As you go faster, you double the speed, for example, you've got only half as much time to get to the top of the bump. This is you being a wheel. It's trying to rise over the bump. It's got half the time, and it's got to move twice as fast to get over the. So it's another factor of 2 twice. You get another factor of 4 in the acceleration the wheel needs, and I didn't do a great job of conveying this to you, but you need a factor of 4 in the acceleration to get the wheel over the bump as you double the speed. And the result is, the tracks have to get smoother and smoother and smoother because you can't afford to take a train going 500 miles over a bump that's an inch high. The forces are so enormous for the rapid accelerations that they destroy the parts. So for these very fast trains, and this is sort of these are works in progress. I stopped teaching about magnetically levitated trains during a period when it seemed like they would never happen, and now they're happening. And then these Hyperloop vehicles and stuff. So during your lifetime, there probably will be trains that don't ride on wheels, because the wheels are a problem, because they have to get over all the imperfections too fast, the forces are too big, and they can't pull themselves forward effectively with friction alone. It's just not strong enough. Okay? What other things to talk about with these issues of going in circles? Spin dryers. How do you get water out of clothes? Take the clothes around in a circle. The clothes don't normally go in a circle, they want to go in a straight line. So in order for you to bend the clothes around in a circle, you have to push them inward toward the center of the circle. So you do that with a sieve, you do that with a screen, something that's got holes in it, and the screen pushes nicely inward on the clothes and bends their path around a circle. But what about the water? The water is inertial too, or tries to be. It wants to go straight. And the sieve or strainer basically will push inward on the clothes, okay, but not so much on the water. The water sneaks through the holes and doesn't get the push inward that it needs to follow the clothes. So it just goes straight and comes out the sides. All right? And they use the same technique of whipping water around a circle and discovering that it goes out the sides to pump water. There are a lot of centrifugal pumps. I'm not fond of the word centrifugal because it's got a lot of misconceptions associated with it. But if you whip water around in a circle, it's trying to go straight, and it will build up pressure on the outside of the circle as it piles up there trying to go straight, and you can pump water that way. All right. The last thing to come back to, or any questions about these spinning systems? Oh, the obvious one, the ones that it's a value, most of you already know these things. If you've got a bottle, say, of shampoo, and there's only like a few drops left in it, and you desperately want that shampoo out of there, you know the trick about whipping it around in a circle, right? Or if you don't, you should. You point it opening outward. And this is true of, it's ketchup, anything that's in a bottle, that's syrupy and you can't get it out. You point the opening away from, it's going to be on the outside. Put the cap on unless you want to decorate your friends with the stuff. Okay? And you whip it around in a circle. In doing that, you're making it accelerate towards the center, towards you, and you're providing the force in the bottle. But what provides that inward accelerating force for the shampoo? Not much. A little bit of these various frictional issues between the bottle and the shampoo, but mostly it'll try to go straight. And by the time you get over here, it'll be all piled up at the opening of the bottle. So you unscrew it and squirt it out. I hope a lot of you already know this trick. If not, this is public service. This is you got another ounce left in all those bottles. All right? You do the same thing with socks. Instead of trying to take it all out, you just whip it around in a circle, and the tip of the sock tries to go straight and pulls itself right. Well, you end up pulling inward, and the sock stretches out and untangles, whatever. All right, last thing I want to talk about was the experience about going over the top of a loop-to-loop. To make sure I got that across to you, that when you go over the top of the loop-to-loop, so I'll freeze frame. There it is. There's you on the loop-loop. You're both going, you're going sideways really fast, but you're also accelerating toward the center. So strongly that gravity alone cannot do that. If I go slowly, gravity can do it. Gravity can make it accelerate toward the center, and actually will cause it to accelerate toward the center too rapidly, and it will leave my hand. But if I go over fast enough, there is this moment at the top and actually the stretch before and after, it's also going on, but it's more complicated to describe. There's a moment at the top where the ball is accelerating so fast toward the center of the loop, that it's accelerating toward the center faster than the acceleration due to gravity. The acceleration due to gravity, of course, is almost 10 meters per second squared. And if I go over fast, it's accelerating toward the center at maybe 15 meters per second squared. That means that gravity is pulling down and I am pushing down my hand. And you can do that. You can make a ball accelerate towards the ground faster than the acceleration due to gravity. Here's the acceleration due to gravity, and there was more than the acceleration due to gravity, right? I helped. So it's the same thing with a little less, you don't want this, a roller coaster that was designed like that would not be, no one would ride it, right? They would love to watch other people ride it. Ha ha. Okay, so when you're at the top, you're being actively pushed down by the car. And the car is being actively pushed down by the track. That's why they have to make the whole thing sturdy, because the car is trying to go straight. It would just drill right through the track if it could. But no, the track's tough. It pushes down on the car pushes down on you. You're all pressed against each other. And you feel such a strong upward feeling of acceleration that it's more than your weight, more than your feeling of weight. You feel an apparent weight that is toward the sky. And the result is when you go over that loop-the-loop, with your eyes closed, you can't tell the moment when you're upside down. It's very smooth. You feel pressed in your seat the whole time. It's almost sort of shocking, like, why didn't I know I was upside down gut-wise? It looked crazy into my eyes, but not to your feeling of weight. Any questions about that? Yeah, Dakota? Yeah, okay, what happens if you make the circle smaller or larger? If you make it larger and you keep the speed the same, now the acceleration gets weaker because the acceleration of going around a circle is proportional 1 over the radius. And basically it's a gentler curve. You got more time to change your velocity, so the acceleration's weaker. And therefore, the bigger the circle is, the loop is, the faster you have to go around it in order to be pressed into your seat at the top. So that's why loop-the-loops are typically pretty small, because they got to get you going fast enough that you go over the top and accelerate downward faster than gravity alone would push you. And they make it too big, and you have to go like crazy fast. There's another issue that the forces of going as you go around. Trying to think why, the whole story. Loop-the-loops, the real loop-the-loops are not pure circles. They could be, but the trip is doesn't feel good. You spend too much time pressed really hard into your seat on the sides, I believe. So they actually elongate the loops. The loops they're not pure circles. They're actually pulled out into a sort of an oval shape. It's got a name, but it's an oval shape. So you sort of only at the last moment, as it whips you over that top, are you accelerating really hard and therefore pressed into your seat while they're inverted. They don't care so much on the sides. Okay? Other questions? I should point out that some of the roller coasters that flip you upside down do it very slowly. They may have a section where they take you over loop-loop fast and you're pressed into your seat, and there are other ones where they take you over the loop-loop really slowly, and those are the ones that strap you all in and they hang you upside down for a while because you're going over that curve, and maybe it's a corkscrew. It can be complicated shapes. But when they've inverted you and you are not accelerating downward faster than the acceleration of gravity, you feel pulled toward the ground. And so you're hanging. You feel like, whoa, yeah, there's the ground over my head. Oh, it's pulling at me. And those are the places, if you're trying to make money, and you want to hang out underneath those corkscrew things, because that's where all the money is coming out of people's pockets, because they're truly hanging. There's no acceleration to save them. Stuff comes raining down. It's like the Berserker, too, the same one that swings you upside down. Wow! everything's coming out of people's pockets because they're basically just inverted and being shaken down. It's not a good place for anyone to spit. Okay, stop. But on the loops that they're done at high speed and you can't tell when you're inverted, nothing comes out of your pocket. Your hat stays on your head, your glasses stay on your nose and stuff. It's as though gravity were pulling you towards the sky. All right? Anything else about carousels and roller coasters? All right. Moving not so right along. Bicycles. And my little opening question, yeah, it's up there. If you raise the height of a sport utility vehicle, how does that affect its turning stability? So you just, or the little trucks that people like to put giant wheels on and pretend they're driving a semi-trailer. Crank it up. What do you think? It's going to be more likely or less likely to tip over during a curve, during a turn, more likely, or has no overall effect? How many think that it will be less likely to tip over when you make it taller? How many think it will be more likely to tip over? Yeah, tough question here. How about no overall effect? All right, yeah, it makes it more likely to tip over, which for people who do this deliberately to their vehicle, this is suitable for Darwin Awards. Is that still culturally relevant? You know what the Darwin Awards are? Okay. Yeah, fine. Take your truck up to and add an extra 10 feet on it. Just don't try to turn. However, there have been vehicles that have been made that are too tall for their wheelbase, and they have been deemed dangerous on the road. So once in a while, one of these things gets through all the safety checks and regulation, and then people tend to flip the vehicles on rapid turns. So we'll look at the physics of that. Why does that happen? Go away there. Okay, so some observations about bicycles. Bicycles, that is a two-wheeled vehicle, it's difficult to keep upright while stationary. There are people who come up next to me on the road, whatever, and they can balance their bicycle there, and they're really good at it, but it's tough. On the other hand, when they are moving forward, they're remarkably stable. That is, almost anybody can keep them upright. And in fact, people can do it without even any hands. There is a detail that is, during turns, when you're riding a bicycle, you have to lean the bicycle, to tip it, so that you're not exactly above its wheelbase, the line formed by the two contact points of the ground. You actually have, if you're going to turn in a particular direction, you have to lean, I would say, in the direction of your turn. You lean toward the center of the turn, and that's not optional. It's required, and it's really, the physics behind that's pretty. It's not complicated, but interesting, or at least I think so. And we'll see why. Okay, so I got a bunch of questions to pursue over bicycles. The first of which is, why is a stationary tricycle so stable? And you think, normally, children start riding these pedal-powered vehicles. They start on three wheels, at least. So they start with a tricycle. And they eventually graduate to using a bicycle, perhaps with four wheels on, some training wheels on it initially, but then eventually you get rid of the training wheels. Because the training wheels are good in certain circumstances, they're actually bad in others. So the basic idea then is why do we ever make this transition from tricycles to bicycles? Or tricycles good enough? And it all has to do with stability issues, and which is really my whole story today, is issues of stability. And it turns out that tricycles are very nicely stable at rest. Bicycles not so much. But in motion, it's the bicycles that are more stable. And so I have to figure out why that's the case. So to start with then, why are tricycles so stable? And as background for the whole idea of stability, I'm going to introduce two types of equilibria. We've already seen what equilibrium is. Equilibrium is when you're experiencing zero net force. And when you're at equilibrium, you're experiencing zero net force, But it's also interesting to know what happens if you leave equilibrium a little bit. Do forces start showing up? And often they do, not always. There are what is known as neutral equilibria. Here's a ball that I will sit on a track, and the ball is currently at equilibrium, zero net force, and we know that because it's not accelerating. And if I move it away from equilibrium, over there, I'll move it a couple inches over and let go, it's still experiencing zero net force. This is a neutral equilibrium. It's at equilibrium, and if you take it away from equilibrium, it's still at equilibrium. Nobody cares. But not all equilibria are neutral. Some of them have an opinion. And what's called a stable equilibrium, which the ball is now in. See, can you guys see the ball? I can zoom in on the ball. Where's the camera? Zoom in. Woo! Okay, the ball's in what's called a stable equilibrium right now because, yeah, it's at equilibrium, zero net force. But if you explore the vicinity of that equilibrium, when you go to the left, it's going up a ramp. And the ramp, oops, that wasn't supposed to happen. When it goes, the ramp will create a ramp force downhill back towards equilibrium. So it's experiencing a force back towards equilibrium. There and here again, this is a stable equilibrium. It's an equilibrium that when you leave it, forces appear, restoring forces that push you back towards equilibrium. And actually, we've already seen lots of stable equilibriums, or equilibria. The watermelon on a spring scale, when it settles, it's in a stable equilibrium. If you push it down lower, it's going to want to go back to equilibrium. It'll accelerate that way. You go higher, back to equilibrium. So an object on a spring scale, you standing on a diving board, or a trampoline, a weight hanging from a spring, a flagpole waving back and forth and trying to be straight and true. These are all stable equilibriums. Okay? The alternative, and I can show you now, we'll get to it in a minute, this is an unstable equilibrium. I can get equilibrium here. It's tricky. Usually takes, I'll get it, but it might be 30 minutes. No, it won't be that long. I'll get it sooner than that. Come on. It was there for a second. Wow. It's being really, okay? It's in equilibrium again, zero net force. But the slightest movement away from equilibrium and forces arise that are anti-restoring. They're not restoring at all. They push the wrong way. Who knew? Yeah. We'll look at what happens when air flows around objects down the road. That, I can't explain that one. But anyway, so something that's in an unstable equilibrium is dangerously vulnerable to being bothered. If it goes away from its equilibrium, forces arise that push it forever away from the equilibrium, and things go bad in a hurry. All right. Okay, so that said then, a tricycle, when it's upright and at rest, is in a stable equilibrium. I've never managed to find a tricycle. Okay, so this is my 5-legged tricycle here with no pedals. I'm in stable equilibrium too. Yeah, am I really stable? I don't know. The situation is that if I tip in any particular direction, this is actually a lousy choice just because I can't even tip it. It's too wheelie. Here, good old-fashioned chair. If I tip this thing, whoa, I tipped too far. If I tip it, restoring forces do show up that push it back towards the happy equilibrium. As long as I don't tip too far, which I did do. If I tip far enough, it goes over. So it has a stable equilibrium, and then actually if you tip it far enough, it has an unstable equilibrium when it's sitting on 2 legs just right, and then it falls over. Well, How do you know? This is an example when I told you long ago that sometimes it's too hard to figure out the forces on something to know which way the forces and accelerations are acting, what's the direction of the net force. And so you can turn to another rule, which is that objects accelerate in the direction that reduces their total potential energy as quickly as possible. Remember that rule? That observation or about our universe? For a stable equilibrium, it is always the case that the equilibrium point itself is a minimum of total potential energy. It's at least within a range of positions for the object. The object can't find any location where it would have less potential energy. It's at the bottom of the barrel. And you can see that here. That marble is as low in altitude as it can go, apart from leaving the gadget. And anything you do to it will make it go upward. So it's at a minimum of total potential energy. There may be other potential energies, but they're insignificant here. It's pretty much gravitational. That's the issue. And if you disturb it, it goes up in total potential energy, and it wants to go back to lower total potential energy. Okay? So objects in a marble in a bowl wants to be at the bottom. That's the lowest potential energy it's got available to it. It'll go there. What's news for a unstable equilibrium? It's at a local maximum, a maximum of total potential energy. When I put the ball, and if I can do it again, stay up there, it has as much total potential energy as it can find any location to be at. And if you bother it, so I didn't even have to try this time. It found a way of getting rid of its total potential energy by leaving the equilibrium and going elsewhere. So as a general rule, objects that have no way of reducing their total potential energy any further than they currently have it, total potential energy, they're in a stable equilibrium. An object that is at equilibrium, but anything it does can reduce its total potential energy. That's in an unstable equilibrium. All right? So for a tricycle is in a stable equilibrium. Why? Because any tip of the tricycle raises the overall total potential energy. It actually lifts the center of gravity of you, the rider, and the tricycle. If I tip this chair, and you come in here and measure things, the height of my center of gravity combined with the chair, it will go up. It's just a geometry problem. I'll get higher, and therefore I'll have more total potential energy, and therefore I'll try to accelerate in the direction that reduces my total potential energy, which is back to where I am. Is that any questions about that idea? There's a simple geometric story for why objects that are sitting on at least 3 points, or that have what I call a base of support, follow this rule. The base of support for a chair, I can just do the chair. The base of support is the polygon formed by the 4 contact points with the ground. It's a square. You visualize there's a square here. And as long as the center of gravity of this whole object is above that square vertically, any tip you make will lift its center of gravity. And you can play with it. You can draw pictures, and if you rotate them, you'll see, oh, that's going up each time. This little gadget, this what you call a stability tower, just more a demonstration version of this. Zoom in. Whoa, overshot. Inertia. There you go. Okay. So this is just a little gadget that I can tip it on hinges. And when I do that, we can watch its center of gravity, which is located in the middle of this middle tier, and where that center of gravity is used to support this string in that little plumb bob there, and it's going to point down towards, to show us, is that center of gravity above the base of support, which is the square, that square piece of wood. That's the base of support. The four corners really define it. As long as the center of gravity is vertically above that square, that base of support, the thing is in a stable equilibrium. You bother it, it goes back. Happy, happy. But if I deform this poor guy, I'll try to make it so you can see it. If I deform it, it's now, stop swinging. That's the wrong physics. Oscillation. Okay, you can now see that the center of gravity is over the edge of that base. It's still stable, but probably barely, it's dangerously close. If I take it outside the base of support, we're right about here, we're going outside, and I let go, over it goes. Because now it has a way to, if it begins to tip a little bit in that direction, its total potential energy begins to decrease its altitude. The altitude of its center of gravity descends, and it can release stored energy, and over it goes. Is that okay? So, where is this relevant? This is why when you're standing on a chair, you're here on the chair. Once you get high, little movements angle-wise take your center of gravity, because it's you and the chair that matter. I got to keep that center of gravity above that four-pointed square base of support. If you start leaning too far over, I can reach it, over you go. You take your center of gravity outside, so it's vertically. If you drop a vertical from your center of gravity, it misses that base, over you go. All right? So this is sort of a recipe for knowing when is it that you're in a stable equilibrium. When is it that any tip will increase your total potential energy? It's if your center of gravity is above the base of support. And it works even if the floor isn't flat. You can do it on a hill. It's a question on the next view graph, but it all works. If you drive a car, for example, on level ground, a car is obviously stable. Its center of gravity is somewhere in the middle of the car, a certain height above the ground. And if you tip it, of course, the center of gravity rises and it accelerates back towards its original equilibrium. If you start driving on a tilted surface, the center of gravity begins to shift relative. So here's your car. On a flat surface, life is easy. On a tilted surface, you're driving along on a road that for some reason was cut at an angle. Now the center of gravity can start to drift outside the two, from your perspective, left wheels. And if it actually gets outside those left wheels, over goes the vehicle. Yeah, Lindsay? That have a tilt to them. So the question is, why do they have roads that are deliberately tilted? And they're banked deliberately. They're almost always on turns. If you think about going around a turn, when you're turning, say, away from you, you need a force towards away from you to cause that acceleration. And if the road is dead flat, the only force available to turn the car away from you is friction, right? And friction's only so strong. There's a limit to how much acceleration you're going to be able to get, and it's a substantial fraction of the acceleration due to gravity, albeit toward the center. But you can't go beyond that. So you'll fly off the road, and particularly if it's icy. When do you go off the road on an icy day? It's on the turns, because you can't get the grip you need from the road to cause the car to accelerate for it to follow the road. You go straight. So where do you look for where would you stand around a turn watching the cars go by and feel safe? It's on the inside of the turn. Don't stand on the outside of the turn, because cars will tend to go straight and fly off the outside of the turn. Is the language okay? You follow that idea? So if they bank the road and for going around that turn, now you can have some support force involved in the inward push. So the now tilted road surface is using support forces to push up and toward the center. It introduces another source of force that is not friction. And you can go around that turn faster and be more confident. Even on an icy day, you will get the inward force you need to do it. Is it okay? Yeah, Michael? Oh, yeah, I'm here talking to nobody. Well, to you guys, but hey, thanks. Other questions? Okay, so a tricycle is wonderfully stable at rest. You can tip it, it goes back, tip it, it goes back. In contrast, a bicycle is a disaster at rest, right? Because it has no base of support, or it's a line between the contact point of the front wheel and the contact point of the back wheel. That line, you have to put the center of gravity right over that line, and you can get it into an unstable equilibrium, right? The slightest tip, and the center of gravity is no longer over the line, and it can reduce its total potential energy by continuing to tip further. Death and destruction. All right? So the tricycle, certainly more stable at rest than a bicycle. And this is why kids start, in a nutshell, why they learn to ride a pedal-powered vehicle. They start with a tricycle. They spend a lot of their time essentially at rest. And the tricycle will stay there all day at rest. Okay, okay. I've already talked about all these things. The bicycle is an unstable equilibrium because as soon as it goes away from that equilibrium, its center of gravity descends, it releases total potential energy, it loves this, it accelerates further that way. The other beautiful thing about using this idea that objects accelerate in the direction that reduces their total potential energy as quickly as possible is that doesn't discriminate between translational motion and rotational motion. You don't have to worry about it whether it's forces or torques or some mixture of the two. It works out completely. So as the bicycle is tipping over, as it's trying to reduce its total potential energy, you can there's some torques involved, there's some forces involved, it's a mess, but you don't have to worry about it. It's clearly reducing its total potential energy. This is the way it wants to accelerate. All right? So, tricycles. The problem with tricycles is not at rest. They're great at rest. The problem is in motion. And how many of you, how else to ask this, have had the experience that you're riding a tricycle down a hill. You get on a nice slope, and you take your feet off the pedals because they're just going to slow you down, and you go really fast down the hill until you come to the fence or the tree or something like that, and you realize, uh-oh, bad news, and you make a very sharp turn with the wheel. And what happens? Well, the sharp turn does cause the ground to push. You all can ride with me. Downhill, hard left turn. And the left turn does get the ground to push the bottom of the tricycle to the left. But that doesn't mean that you accelerate to the left. It means the wheels accelerate to the left. And the simple result is that you continue to go straight, inertial, and the tricycle shoots out from underneath you. And some number of you are going to have the classic dented chin from having landed face first flying off a tricycle. I won't do that. I won't have you admit to it. It's like it's part of growing up. You crash tricycles. But the reason has to do basically with inertial problems. The stability of the tricycle is still in play. As it begins to tip over, your center of gravity does begin to rise. And that does, so the restoring forces and/or torques do appear. They're trying to save you. The problem is those forces aren't strong enough to make you accelerate back to upright quickly enough, and inertia wins. So it's a battle between the restoring forces associated with stability and the inertia's just determination to keep going. And so tricycles crash when they try to turn too rapidly. This is the same thing with cars. So cars where they have their center of gravity too high, and therefore are not especially stable at rest. The tipping process raises, it's pretty easy for them to go beyond what we call the catchment basin for the stability. The chair is stable over a certain range of angles here, but once you get past a certain angle, you're sort of outside the catchment basin or the watershed that brings you back, and you go elsewhere. The taller the chair is, the smaller the range of angles that'll bring you back to upright, given a chance. And that's why cars that are too tall, vehicles that are too tall, or have narrow wheelbases and therefore little teeny bases of support, all that stuff, they're all bad news. You don't want to put, or equivalently, piling your entire household goods on the roof of the car and driving off. Same idea, you've lifted the center of gravity really high in the car. You are reducing its stability and its ability to recover from tips and make it more vulnerable to inertial effects where the top of the car, your entire collection of, I don't know, Beanie Babies decides to go straight and the car drives out from under it and flips. All right? So tricycles are great. They're beautifully stable at rest. They are vulnerable to tipping over in motion. What about, which I call, they're dynamically unstable. Yeah, raising the height of a sport utility vehicle makes it vulnerable. Okay, so that brings us to dynamic stability, stability in motion. And the place to start with that is, well, it's asking about a broom, but I'll use a yardstick instead. The yardstick's just sitting there on its head. I guess in principle there's a little base of support here. It's got a tiny little rectangle, and if I get the center of gravity right above that, it's in principle stable. In practice, there's just, it's so tiny. It's basically in an unstable equilibrium. So I get it on balance on a point. It's like balancing a pencil on a point. In principle, you can do it. You can get it to equilibrium, but the slightest bother, and over it goes. So you can fix with motion. So in motion, you can get this is unstable at rest, but you can make it stable in motion by working at it. And the question here is, to balance a broom or a stick on your hand, you have to look at something. If you do it blindfolded, it's going to go over. I mean, who knows which way it'll go. But there is a way of balancing it. What do you look at? Do you look at your hand? Do you look at the top of the broom? So let me ask you guys, how many think you look at your hand to do the balancing? How many think that you look at the top of the broom? How many think you look at the broom's center of gravity? How many think you look at the middle of the broom? Okay, it's a pretty broad spread. So we can try. Nobody voted for your hand. You're doing this. It's hopeless. Actually, this is so long I can't even look at the top of the broom. If I look at the top of the broom, I guess I can sort of do it, but that's actually not the best thing to look at. If I look at the middle happens to coincide with the broom's center of gravity in this case. With a real broom, the center of gravity would be higher than the middle of the broom. But actually what you do want to, I have to give you the answer. You want to look at the center of gravity, because the goal here is to keep the center of gravity over your hand, because that is the unstable equilibrium. Remember, the unstable equilibrium comes about because the center of gravity, which is the effective height of this complicated object, is able to descend. And what you want to do, if it descends, the total potential energy goes down, it's happy, it crashes. So what you want to do is make sure that center of gravity never has a chance to go down. So you look at it, you look at the center of gravity, and you keep putting the base under the center of gravity. So you keep returning it to the unstable equilibrium. Is that okay? And what's amazing is the bicycle does this for you automatically. when you're bicycling along, so I'm going to get sort of bicycle. Okay, you can stay in that unstable equilibrium if you keep putting the wheels, and they're one straight line base of support. That's all you got to work with. You keep putting that under your center of gravity. It's your overall center of gravity, you and the bicycle. And when you're upright, that'll keep you upright. And so in principle, you're there dithering back and forth with your hands, trying to make sure that that little base of support is underneath your center of gravity. You okay with this idea? In a minute, I'll come back to the fact that the bicycle does this for you automatically. You don't even need to put your hands on the handlebar. Before I do that, though, I want to point out that when you're going straight and true, life is particularly simple. But if you make a turn, it's a little more complicated. Watch the turning effect. In a tricycle, it's something you can't do on a tricycle. So let's suppose we're going straight, and we want to make a turn to the left. So to make a turn for left, suppose we stay upright in this wonderful unstable equilibrium, and to turn left, I just turn the wheel, nothing else. The ground will push toward the left at the bottom of the wheel, and it will drive out from under me, and I will crash. So the problem there is that if you consider my center of mass, and there are actually a number of ways to look at the same problem, so I'm going to pick one and stick with it. If you look at my center of mass, which is somewhere around here, if anything exerts a force at a lever arm for my center of mass and at right angles to that lever arm, it's going to produce a torque on me and make me begin to rotate. I'll undergo angular acceleration. And when I turn left on the wheel, the ground pushes the wheel left. Well, that's at a lever arm from my center of mass. Here's my center of mass. It's pushing the bottom of the bicycle to your left. That's a twist. It's a twist that will make my head go toward the right, right? So I'm going to tend to flip over right, head rightward. So turning without tipping the bicycle causes you to flip head away from the turn. Remember that one? How about if I do something different? I don't turn at all. I just lean to the left. In this case, gravity exerts, there is a torque on me now. It's actually not gravity directly. It's the upward push. The support force on the wheels is pushing up and somewhat to the right of my center of mass, which is here. The push up is over here. That's another twist. It's also a torque on me. In this case, it tends to make me flip over, head moving to the left, toward the left. Okay? So the point is, if I turn without leaning, I flip over to the right. If I lean without turning, I flip over to the left. Is the language okay? If I do them both, I don't flip over at all. And this is why if I turn left and lean left, those two torques cancel and you stay upright. And that leaning is something you can do on a bicycle. You can't do it on a tricycle. If you could do it on a tricycle, you can make the turns as hard as you like. But you can't. It's got too many wheels. A two-wheel vehicle, you can lean it. And the process of leaning is complicated. I won't go into it right now. But you get it to lean as you turn. And you do this, anybody who's ridden a bicycle, you do it so automatically, you don't even notice that you're committing to the lean until you're into it. So you lean into the turn, during the turn, and that perfectly compensates for the tendency to flip over. What I'll do next time is go back to the fact that the bicycle is in an unstable equilibrium, but it steers for you to rescue you if you begin to tip in a way that obviously you don't want to do because you'll fall over. It fixes it. And the reasons for it fixing are kind of cool. So we'll come back to that on Wednesday.